So this presentation is going to be more from the user side. And just a quick presentation about myself. My day-to-day job is trying to make our weather and climate model try to run as fast as possible on the new supercomputer. But recently I've been working on the procurement for our new supercomputer, and now we are working on the porting of our software on the new supercomputer. So before talking about the new supercomputer, so a word I will say quite a lot, I need to talk about our current HPC, which is a Cray XC40. Just to give you an idea where we started from and then where we are moving to in the future. So our current HPC, which you can't really see in here, is a Cray XC40. Is like 9 years old. Is composed of 3 systems. They are like Haswell, Broadwell, around 3,000 nodes each. And these 3 systems, we have 2 that are work for operational research, and this for resilience reasons. So if one supercomputer goes down, then all our weather models move on the other supercomputer. And we have one research that is only for research, which, strangely enough, is the largest one. Each supercomputer have 3 types of file system. They are like, one is for home directory, one is for research, and one is for critical. The critical file system is, so each operational system has one version of the critical file system, while the research is shared between the operational. This naturally, again, for resilience, if one critical file system goes down, then we move to the other supercomputer. All of this is managed by a Lustre 2.5. So it's quite an old version of Lustre. We didn't really upgrade after it's been accepted, mainly because we don't like too much stopping our supercomputer, so we have tendency not to upgrade our software. All of this is for a total of 27 petabyte of data, and is all like spinning disk, so like HDD. So during these like almost 10 years of working with Lustre, before we didn't have Lustre, we made a lot of software changes on our atmospheric model, or our ocean models and climate models, so mainly to improve the performance. One of the first things we did was to work on the metadata. We noticed that the metadata performance were one of the first things we were hit. Our atmospheric model at the beginning, when it was opening a file, every task was opening the file and closing the file and reading the file, and that was creating a lot of pressure on the metadata server. And so that was one of the first things we learned to do, is just open the file once, send it around. That's for like normal models. For like small computational, like for Python workflow and things like this, we noticed that we couldn't really use Lustre as the normal file system where you read a lot of small files. We had to create RAM drive, send the Python library in there, and then start it from there, because otherwise our metadata was being hit quite a lot. Other changes we did, our atmospheric model, was to be able to set directly the Lustre striping from the model itself. So we had like a C layer that does the I/O, where we were calling the Lustre C API, and then they set the stripe there. For other workflow, we had in the workflow itself like the idea of call LFS set stripes in there. For all these 10 years that being using Lustre, one thing we notice is like once a month we do a rate check for our file system just to be sure that the metadata is fine. So it's not technically a rate check, it's more like FSK. And we noticed that every time we run that, some model were significantly impacted, mainly our ocean model. That's because they were using netcdf file. In fact, we started to use one of these models like a canary in the gold mine. We run it every day, and as soon we see like it start to go slow in performance, we know the metadata servers are not doing as good as we want them to do. So moving forward, we are getting a new supercomputer, And we is a partner with Microsoft, and the supercomputer is going to be hosted on an Azure cloud, but the supercomputer itself is an HP Cray. And I'm still trying to figure out what is a climate supercomputer, but that's what they say at the time. So how did you get there? So what were the requirements for the new file system? First of all, when we set the requirement for our procurement, we have to be generics. Some of the things we will say will look a little bit strange, like why you did not just ask for that. It's because we can't. We have to make our requirement not specific to any technology or hardware. We didn't say we want Lustre. Also, if we were already using Lustre, it could have been any file system. We just say we want this performance. And also, it has to be vendor and product and platform agnostic, so everyone that has the capacity can bid on our procurement. So as a target, we have an increase in computational power of 6 times. So taking the 3 systems together and have a 6 times. We wanted them to divide it into two big systems. What we did to make sure that we get what we really needed, instead to say, okay, the performance of the current system is X, we want Y for the new new supercomputer. We took like the metrics itself to see really what we were using it. So we collect metrics for 5 months, all the 3 file systems, and see what we were using. And as a metrics, we took the read and write bandwidth, bidirectional, as the peak, the daily peak, and the average peak. And then for these 5 months, we took the mean. And the same things we did for the metadata, but in this case, just for the peak. So as a result, what we asked was like 5x of the storage capacity that we had. Why less than 6x is because our current supercomputer was over provisioned in terms of space, because we needed in order to achieve the bandwidth from the spinning disks. So we saw we are not using as much of the space. We are not asking as much of space. But in terms of capability, that increased. In fact, we asked for more that we were using in terms of 6x. In fact, for the critical metadata, the one that we are more interested in, the one that was suffering more from the various rate check and everything, we ask even more than 6x. In fact, around 7. So this is the information that we ask. Not showing here is like we wanted for every file system a single stream 2 gigabytes a second. We wanted all our file system to be POSIX compliant, and starting from the home, the one where we use like just to store file and scripts and Python scripts, we want like a 1 petabyte, duplex bandwidth of 25 gigabytes a second. And then one of the most important things for us was a snapshot ability, so we were able to recover if somebody loses the file, the configuration files. And the metadata, because we wanted there to be able to be used for script and everything. So a lot of Python workflow. We didn't want to do the RAM drive things anymore. So we asked for 6,000 file crate per second using 4K files. In terms of research, we asked for 32 petabytes, and we asked for a duplex bandwidth of 1 terabyte a second, but not for all the 32 petabytes. So we know that the flash is quite expensive. So if we ask a high bandwidth, we are going to get mainly flash. But having 32 petabytes of flash could be expensive. So we say only a bit of that has to be reached that. But we couldn't say we want a tier system, because we have to be open to any technology. There are some companies that do only flash. We were to be open for them. So what we ask is, OK, give this speed. But at the same time, we want to be able to do for all the storage a 200 gigabytes a second for 24 hours, to keep the average. So in the sense, like, the idea behind it was give us flash, but then there should be something behind and then can store for 200 gigabytes a second for 24 hours. And that was taken by the average daily usage that we saw before. We have some random I/O requirements that weren't as strict as the other, because this was way difficult for the vendor to achieve. And we had quite a significant amount of file crate per second for the research. And the same for critical. So we have a storage of 7 petabytes, 1 petabyte of double bandwidth of 650 gigabytes a second, and 134 gigabytes a second for the 24/8 period. So what did we get? We got naturally a Cray HPE. For the home file system, we got GPFS. That was mainly for be able to reach the metadata capability and the snapshot. That was, I think, the two driver that made HPE beat GPFS for that system. But for research and critical, naturally, we were using Lustre. We're using specifically HPE Cluster Store E1000. And as a version of Lustre is a 2.15.0, which is quite significantly upgrade from the version that we are still using right now. So a lot of new things we had to learn. We say, ooh, fancy new things. As a hardware itself, we got a multi-tier system, as we kind of were expecting since the requirement. So we have a flash tier or a flash pool. So we're using the pool for Lustre, which is they're called flash and disk, just to keep it simple. And this was done for the peak bandwidth and for the random requirement. And then we have disk for the 24 hours requirement. Everything by default is written in the flash pool. So we are having two systems, what we call two external hosting zones for operational region. All the requirement you saw before, that was for one system. So you have to multiply everything by 2 for what we are going to use in the future. The file systems are not going to be automatically replicated because they are quite far from each other. So it's something that we want people to do manually. So we have like this multi-tier file system. And naturally, it's not something that is easy to manage. We can tell user, you send data here, you send data there. But what we want to do is making as simple as possible for the user. So we have an automatic way to move the data from flash to disk. It's called Gray Data Service. That was the vendor suggested us to use. And it works as rules. Like every time there's some rules are activated, they move some specific data. And we decided to use 3 rules. A baseline rules that is run once a day, where it say migrate files that were not accessed for a long time. Being generic here, because we have different area in each file system. We have one area where for long data, one area for scratch data. So each them vary depending on that. But for example, for the long data is like 65 days. So if you don't touch your file for 65 days, you find it that is on disk. We have an emergency rule of around 70%. We call, maintenance rule for 17%. And that starts to move data that's not been touched for a week. And we are doing that because we want to keep our flash pool around 70%. And then we have an emergency rule that starts at 85% and migrate files that were not accessed until very recently. And in the case of the critical file system, that is the last 24 hours. And we think it might not be enough. We might think that we might have to, in the case of emergency, we might have to move the data that is not been touched for the last 6 hours, because that's how our cycle works. If you're wondering why 85%, is because there was a lot of suggestion that around 85% full flash disk might start to lose performance, and we do not want that. We are quite strict in terms of runtime. Our forecast has to run in an hour. If it takes an hour and 10 minutes, there's alarm bells going all around and people knocking in the desk, the door of the office of the other people. So we have this system. It's different from what we had before, where we have only one single file system. Now we have GPFS, we have Lustre, we have flash storage, and we have disk pool. And we had to do a lot of communication to the users, a lot of explaining the data management, what's happened when the Lustre flash fill up. It goes everything in disk, nothing should stop. How does it work, the various performance of the system. Like GPFS is very good for metadata. Lustre disk is good for bandwidth, but if you want very good bandwidth, flash. So we started to do all these things and try to train the user. And one thing we're trying to tell them is, does your data really need to be on the flash pool? The other day, there was a user that say, I have 4 petabytes of data, to store for my trial. Where do I put it? Please do not put it on the flash, because that will be half of the flash pool by itself. So there is these things that all this information that need to go out. And unfortunately, the user, they have tendency not to read the user guide. So there is a lot of controlling, monitoring, checking that everything is going as we expect. In fact, one of the initial user feedback when we were doing all this training, and that's why it's too complicated. And it is like, not really, but for them it's already like too many things to think of all the other things that, well, oh, do we really need to worry where I'm putting my data? Before I was just putting anywhere. Now I have to think about this. So it's something like, unfortunately, it's the situation, what is it? And we will have to improve the communication even further. So if you're wondering why we did progressive file layout, well, the first thing is like we did not have any previous experience. Our current HPC did not have the ability to do PFL, so we never use it. We don't have benchmarks. We don't know how the performance goes, and we didn't have plan to using it. And our provider, they say like CDS is the things you're going to use, and all the benchmark they did was with CDS. So that was we are expecting to use. Whenever there is a plan to start to investigate PFL for a couple of reasons. One is like, can we obtain the same performance as if we were using Flash only, or even can we improve the performance by using data or metadata? Because we have a lot of workflow, mainly the Python one, that just is mainly metadata, use a lot of metadata. And the other things like, what if CDS cannot cope with the amount of data? So we designed this, and it was about something we were using 6 years ago. So things change. We might be writing more data on Flash than we were expecting. So we need alternative just in case. One last thing about metadata, say, was like something was very important for us. We naturally have multiple metadata server, multiple metadata target for each file system. And one thing we did was setting up DNE1 for the critical file system. That's for resilience reasons. For all the information we try to gather around, we always hear DNE1 is the things you want. These are the things you can use. In reality, what we really want was DNE3. That's the things we would like to use, but unfortunately was not deemed to be production ready for the Lustre version that we have. We started using DNE2 for research, where the user were like, we have DNE2, so Stripe for multi-metadata, and we use an inheritance of 3. So after 3 was using a normal DNE1. But we hit some roadblocks, some issues, where we had a situation where we lost completely the research file system because one of the metadata server got in a pickle, and that's not something we can afford. So we are starting to move everything to DNE1, and we just using a random selection depending on the user, so each user will have his own. What we are thinking to do is keep a couple of metadata server for the bad users. We know some users that they really like to hit the metadata server. So if they not behave, we keep them in that, stay there in your little corner, please. So the conclusion is like we have a shiny new Lustre file system, and we are looking forward to use it in a lot. The file system is composed of Flash and disk tiers and pools. By default, everything is written to Flash, and we use CDS with these rules for moving the data from Flash to disk. But we are not 100% sure that that thing is going to work. So everything in paper looks great. We will have to see what's happening in real life. That's why we are looking for progressive file layout. The initial feedback is the user is like, it's too complicated. We're sorry. And the metadata is managed everything by DNE1 because DNE2 cause issues on the research file system. Cool. Any questions?
Right.